Okay, good morning. Good morning, everybody. Hemshech Ayin Beis, Volume 3. We're on page 1209. Aleph Reish Tes. The top third of the page. And just to review what we learned, and I'll give you some also, I did a little more research on the whole topic of the moon and the sun. But just to make sure we're right on the target of what the point here is. The Rebbe Rashab in this new volume began with explaining what is Ein Oid. In this verse in Veschanon that says, V'yadaita Ayin, v'shavesa levavecha, ki Hashem, ki avayu elikim, b'shamayim emal v'la'oretz mitochas, and then two more words, Ein Oid. In English, you shall know today, draw to your heart, that Havaya is Elikim, the unity of Havaya and Elikim, B'Shamayim Emal, the heaven above, Eretz Mitachas, earth below. Ein Oid. There's no other. So after explaining at length the beginning, the opening of the verse, all the way to the last two words, which was all about the unity. I'm not going to review that again. We've done that at length. The unity of the Havaya Elikim below, which is the divine within existence, the divine, the bligvul beyond existence, transcendence, and how that also is all united. So what does this Ein Oid add? So in one word, one line, the two words add that all the above in that verse is talking about revelation, the revealing godliness. But what about the very concealment itself, Elokim itself? And that's what Ein Oid comes to teach us, that the very concealment has its own process and its own way of revealing something, which he calls is the darkness itself becomes light. Not just the darkness leads to light, and it's a process where Tzimtzum leads to revelation, but that the light, the Laila K'yom Yer, that the night shines. And he made it clear that we're not talking about just a step in the process using moon and sun here, that the moon will be radiant just like the sun as it was before the moon was diminished. That is all about revelation. With Shemesh and Mogan Hashem Elikim, which he compared Mogan as name of Elikim, which is the sheath or the case in which the sun is in, but it also refers to the moon, that the moon will shine. But then there's something else that will happen. That the moon, which is Malchus, Eishes Chayla Teres Baila, will rise and be greater than the sun. In the context of, in the language of the Sfiris, that Malchus will be the crown to its Bala, to its husband, which is Zah. And that's the quality that Elokim itself has, not as a part of or a revelation or revealing the divine of Havaya, but something that it itself has. We will learn later that this is going to be called the Helam Ha'atzmi, that the core source of it is the Helam Ha'atzmi, the fundamental concealment of the divine, not as a negative, but as actually a very powerful force that's higher than revelation. But we didn't get there yet. In another way of putting it, it's really a revelation of Etzem that transcends revelation. But revelation, of course, we can't dismiss, because for us, revelation is necessary in our lives. God doesn't need any of this. So this level is what Ein Oid is referring to. And he made it clear that it's not because it's being makabel from another level of Oid, but the makabel itself has now become a mashpia, has its own innate power. And of course, this is only going to be revealed in the future, l'asud laveh, because without going through the earlier steps, you can't reach to a place like this. So there'll be more discussion on this, and we'll elaborate, and I'm by no means exhausted saying this is it, we got the explanation, but this is so far what the Rebbe Rashab said. In this discussion, in comparing the different stages and the different revelations, we went into the discussion of the moon and the sun, with the expression being, V'hoya ira lavona, ke'ira chama. that the light of the moon in the future will be like the light of the sun. Because today, not in the future, the moon does not have light, like it doesn't have light of its own. Its light comes as a reflection of from the sun. And even when it's a complete reflection, like a full moon, it's also not quite like the sun, and it's still receiving from the sun. Says that the moon will be like the sun itself, will have the same radiance. There are different interpretations, and this is where I did some research. In other Maimar Chassidus, how it discusses. There's actually two interpretations in this, which I don't really want to go into detail because it's quite intricate. But briefly, I will say that the interpretation one is that the moon will be exactly like the sun, and even when it says afterwards that the sun will be 7 times bigger or stronger, the Hayir Levana means that the Levana will be Ka'ir Achama of the future. That's one interpretation. There's another interpretation that the Hayir Levana will be like Ka'ir Achama of now. So the moon will be like the sun today, but the sun will be greater. So it's two different interpretations. Another difference is when they say the moon will be like the sun, will it still receive that from the sun? And it'll just be equal? Or will it be its own track, as if two luminaries? That's another discussion. And furthermore, I found that Tzemach Tzedek discusses actually the same thing the Rebbe Rashab talks about, which is the top of page 1209, the parentheses, that when you say Loi Hoya La'elam, Loi Hoya Ma'elam, there was never such a state. And he says Tzarachi and Gadol. Tzarachi and Gadol means so he says Tzarachi means we need to understand, we need to delve into it. Tzarachi and Gadol means it's very unclear. Tzarachi and Gadol, you use only the strongest term when something is really not understood at all. And he says Tzarachi and Gadol, what that means, because seemingly, like the Rebbe Rashab addresses, La'asadav will be like it was before the diminishment. So how could the Eitz Chaim say that it will be Loi Hoya? It was. Maybe not for a long time, because the moon immediately complained. But before the moon complained, and God had created two luminaries, the future seems to go back to that. So the Rebbe Rashab's answer, and I'll review that right now, which is Tzemach Tzedek does not write that answer. Rebbe Rashab's answer is
in
that
the Tzemach Tzedek in HaTorah.
Yeah. Bereshis, if you want to know exactly the page and want to look it up, I can tell you. Bereshis. There's a whole my mimer on the Gemara and Chulin about this whole sugya. It's on the Tzarachi and Gadol. Where's the? He brings the Rabbeinu Bachai. It's a whole sugya here. If you really want to understand this well, you have to learn this mimer here. I'm just looking at the page. I think it's Lamed Tes Aleph. I just want to make sure. Well, the mimer begins in Radiate Bereshis, page Lamed Zayin Aleph, 37a. And it's at length. It talks about what the moon was complaining about, what was it missing, what did it want, and it's a big discussion. So the reason I'm not going into it, because the Rebbe Rashab is speaking this here in our mind is not so negay the moon and sun's, the moon's complaint and its dialogue with God, and what the diminishment signify. But it's an intriguing topic for sure, and that's why I'm giving you the source here. I'm just looking, where's the Tzarachi and Gadol? That struck me. The whole Teferes Sima, the Rabbeinu Bachai with the Tzuneris, Okay, I don't see the actual language right now, and I don't want to just delay this further. Now it's making me crazy. And then there's another mimer following it, which is Amem Amid Beis. Okay, but to get back to our discussion here.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's on page Lamed Ches. He says, with the Eitz Chaim says, Tzarichi and Gadol. Maybe we'll have time sometime. If you guys want to learn it, we can learn it together, but it's a separate subject for sure. What's relevant to our discussion here is that when it says that the Osid Lave, in the future, the sun will be removed from its sheath, that's not what we're addressing here. We're not addressing the intensity of the sun. We're not addressing the intensity of the moon, that it will be like the sun. That Elikim will be like Havaya, in the sense that it will reveal Havaya. But we're talking about that the Nartik itself, the darkness itself will illuminate. That's the key thing we need to remember. And that is when the Eitz Chaim says that that never happened. That never happened. The darkness itself should illuminate. No. At best, you could say before the diminishment, the moon and the sun were equal. And they received from one keser, as he explains, from Teferis Imo. Now, I know we had a discussion last time, Eliezer brought it up. Does it mean that they received from one, like two channels? Or was it one channel that just Maiver would just travel through? So from the parentheses, it appears that that was the case in the beginning of creation, that it traveled through. In other words, it just passed through the sun. It didn't change it fundamentally. But since Maiver, according to the Alter Rebbe, does have some effect, so then there's another level where it doesn't even have Maiver. It's not even passing through. Does that mean two channels, or does that mean one channel and without any effect? So I said it's not so definitive here. You could say both ways. I'm not positive. When you look at the Radiate, I didn't really come to any conclusion there either. But the truth is, you could say it both ways. I just was saying that from what we read here, it's not clear to me, very clear what is going on exactly.
One channel. Otherwise, what was the complaint of the moon?
Well, that's why you have to look in this. So what Rabbi Bechai says, that's what the moon was complaining, was saying we should have two channels. But there weren't two channels. That means there wasn't two channels. It was one channel. So the moon was wrong. That's the bottom line. There were never two. You could say there were never two channels. It was never meant to be two channels. It meant to go b'derech maiver. That's what he says. Hakavan b'chinas malchus kiblam b'chinas derech maiver. Hazah. And maiver does not change, he says, the light. That means the moon was just as strong as the sun. The fact that it traveled through the sun was like a filter, it was like a funnel. It didn't weaken the light. So when the Eitz Chaim says that la'asilave, it never was that was never happened, that's why the Tzemach Tzedek calls that tzarichi and gadol, because l'cheira did happen. The moon and the sun were like one keser. That was before the diminishment, before the complaint. That some of the Rashab is machadish here, something different. He says that ma'ivir also has some impact. So the asid lavi, there won't be ma'ivir altogether. That's what it appears from what we're learning here. But learning of the Radiate could help clarify if you're looking to clarify. Bottom line, going back to our discussion, is that we're not looking for the sun, the moon being like the sun. We're talking about the moon being greater than the sun. The moon revealing the power of Malchus, Eishes Chayil Ateres Baila, that Malchus itself has. The moon itself has. 1 second, please. 1 second. Okay. So I just want to make sure, like we spoke about, not going off the reservation, that what we're learning now is to focus on what's important here. So yes, it's very intriguing to understand the moon and sun. That's why I'm referring you to the Maimonides Teda. Discuss it relatively at length. I learned it quickly. I didn't really go in depth there. And then, if you're also interested, you can go to Sefer Erchim. Sefer Erchim is like encyclopedia of Chassidus. There's an erech called Er Halavana, the light of the moon. And there he brings the different opinions. Some of them I just referred to. There are other opinions from different places of Chassidus that talk about this topic. So it deserves, if I want to make it clear, it deserves its own conversation at length. The whole moon and what was the moon's complaint. Why then did God punish it by diminishing it? Is it a punishment? Is it actually the way to achieve what the moon wanted? This is a big discussion. There's actually, you may have heard of a chassid, his name is Isaac Homler, or Isaac Epstein. He wrote an entire sefer called Shnei HaMe'eres HaGedelim. It's a whole sefer he wrote called The Two Great Luminaries, and there he discusses this at length as well. It's a Gemara in Chulin. The Gemara in Chulin says this whole discussion about the moon's diminishment based on the verse that first it says they were great luminaries, and then it says Hamoyer HaKotten, the small luminaries. So what happened? How did it get from big to small? So this is a big discussion, and I really want to tell you that it deserves long conversation. I just feel I don't want to go there now because it would really be going off the whole theme of Ayin Beis. But I just wanted enough to understand what we're saying here. So the parentheses of the Rebbe Rashab is an interesting one because it seems like he's answering the Tzarachi and Gadol of the Tzemach Tzedek and Eira Teda. But I qualify that because I want to go back to Eira Teda because I think that Tzemach Tzedek also attempts to explain it somewhat. And not quite the way the Rebbe Rashab does, but the concept of Maiver is from the Tzemach Tzedek in that Maimer and Eira Teda. In Bereshis, about this whole subject matter.
The moon's complaint was why
some of you want to make a time to learn it with each other, by all means, I can give you all the sources and you can learn it if you really want to get a bigger picture here. But I want to go back to where we are and not digress. What you ask me?
I said, why can't you say that Losid Lovoi will be something Loi Hoyo Me'oilom? Before the mute, both got from Tiferes the Imo, but the moon got it through the Zoh, and the moon complained, why should she get through the Zoh? She is important like the Zoh. The Zoh is given the Koyach HaGvul. The moon is given the Koyach HaGvul. So why should she get it through the Zoh? So Hashem said, if you won't get it through the Zoh, then it's impossible for the world to exist. Because it cannot be. But La'asid Lavoi, after the Birurim and everything, the moon itself shines. You can't say that.
I didn't say you can't say it. I said I'm not going there because the Rebbe Rashab is not going there. You could say a lot of things. I would advise that you look in the Maimonides Teda, because the Eira Teda asks the Tzarech and Gadol. It's not my question. The Eira Teda says Tzarech and Gadol. So before you come to answer Tzarech and Gadol, you want to know why the Tzemach Tzedek didn't think of what you just said. Okay, so you have to look there and you'll see. It's not so simple because the Loi Hoya Oid is not talking about Eishes Chayil Ateres Baila necessarily. Loi Hoya Ma'elam rather is talking about the fact that there were two equal luminaries, and that seems to be the case before the diminishment. So what you're answering is not what the Tzemach Tzedek or the Rebbe Rashab are answering. They're not saying the Tzemach Tzedek, the Rebbe Rashab could have said easily, Lo hayya ma'olam, because the moon becomes greater than the sun, and that never happened before. But he's not answering that. He's saying the issue with Maiver, because I'll tell you why. Because when if you look in the Eitz Chaim says that what was Lo hayya ma'olam? That there would be Shnei Melachim b'Keser Echad. He says that never happened. But the fact is that did happen, because that's exactly what the moon was complaining about. Why there two kings can't have one crown? That's Eitz Chaim says two kings having one crown, the never happened before. And the question is, it did before the diminishment. So fine, you can start giving explanation. I'm not saying your explanation has no value, but I would, before you go further, you need to first understand the questions that they're asking here. And the Tzemach Tzedek's Maimer can help with that. That's all I'm saying here. He says clearly the inyan of that Shnei Ksarim because Shnei Eshavim became Mosam, and and it'll be Shnei Malachim b'Keser Echad.
That the Levana got directly from Tiferes the Imo.
You're fine, but you know what? Why does the Rebbe Rashab and the Tzemach Tzedek not accepting and saying this themselves? Did you think about that? You have an answer. It's very nice, but we're talking about two great Rabbeim, the Tzemach Tzedek and the Rebbe Rashab, did not answer that. The Tzemach Tzedek says Tzarichi and Gadol. The Rebbe Rashab answers about Maivid. So think about it. Anyway, I don't want to continue because this is exactly what I want to avoid. Now, I think it's wise to look into the Tzemach Tzedek before, because you need to understand the full context. Why would the Tzemach Tzedek Tzarichi and Gadol and not just answer a simple answer saying the moon will be greater? And the reason is because the Eitz Chaim says clearly, Shnei Melachim b'Keser Echad, and that existed before the diminishment of the moon as well. That's what he says. Shagam Kedem Amiyut Lo Hayya. Yeah. So Keser Echad L'Shneim seems to have been both. Okay. Now, last class I gave the introduction about that the same idea that we're discussing now. Which is that they're talking about the power of the Levana itself, of Malchus itself, of the Kalim itself. He's now going to talk about it in the context of Tzimtzum and Reshimu. So we didn't learn it inside, but I gave a long introduction, if you remember, that the soul and the body and the Eris and Kalim are two different tracks. So yes, the energy and the vitality of a body comes through the soul, just like the energy and the vitality of the Kalim comes through the Eir. But still the two tracks. And La'asid Lavei will be the revelation that the power of the Kalim themselves. But we're still in the middle of the discussion. So you just keep in mind that the contrast here is, like he keeps saying, so as soon as you're talking about how Malchus is receiving the Eir, we're not getting into whether it's getting a small Eir or it's getting a larger Eir or it's equal to the shemesh, to the sun. It's still not what we want, and it's still not Ein Oid. Ein Oid is referring to the Levana and Malchus itself, not as it's receiving light from anywhere, and not as being even equal to anywhere. Its own unique power. So we're going to continue from that line. It said the line begins Meir Boy. He says, that all this that we're talking about, that the channel will from Bina will go to the sun and the moon equally, the Derech Maiver passing through, all this is still how Malchus is receiving Eir, whether it's receiving it from the Shemesh or from Tiferes Ima, but it's still receiving Eir. So now the Rebbe Rashab continues. And even the way it was before the Tzimtzum, at that state, before Tzimtzum, the Erein Sof was radiating through the Eisius of the Reshimu, What that means is the Reshimu didn't exist yet, because Reshimu by definition means a trace, a residue, an echo only, so let me just explain what this means. You may be aware because we discussed it at length, but just to refresh your memory. Before the Tzimtzum, we know there was totally divine consciousness. It's all godliness. The thing is, in the divine consciousness itself began to emerge levels. The level where God wants existence. If you remember at length, the Rebbe Rashab, and the Frierdiker Rebbe, when we learned Tzadik Daled, explained at length the process. First, the stirrings, where there's the Haskama, then there's the Shakavatariya, and then there's the Hachlota. So the first there's Haskama was what was Haskama was consideration, deliberation, and determination. And then God chooses a Ratzon that he wants to create 10 spheres. So from the infinite possibilities of the artist comes the 10 spheres. All this is pre-Tzimtzum. So as soon as God begins to envision 10 spheres, you already have what we call the Oisius, what's called the Reish Hermenusa de Malka. In the beginning of when God chose or gave Rishus, the king, it says, Goliv Galifu B'tihiri law. This is a statement in Zohar in the beginning, in Bereshis. Goliv Galifu means chakika. He engraved, Goliv Galifu, a double engraving. Goliv Galifu, he engraved B'tihiri law in the higher light, in the higher brightness, which is the Ayin Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum. God is envisioning the spheres. So that's called Eisius HaReshimu Lifnei Tzimtzum. Now, why is it called Reshimu? Because once the recedes, then the Eisius remain, but the Eisius are essentially empty, hollow. There's no revelation in them. It would be like somebody drawing letters. You understand the letters, but then the energy of the letters is zapped out of them, is what's the word about, drained from them. So all you have is letters. Letters are concealed. So the Tzimtzum essentially drew away receded and drained the letters from the Oir Ein Sof that filled them before the Tzimtzum. So God's envisioning the 10 spheres, Esa spheres Hagnuzis, the 10 hidden spheres. He's envisioning Shir Atzmei B'Koyach, which is that state of Goliv Galifu B'Tihiri law. So this is all God envisioning, but it's still on the God's consciousness level. Nothing can exist in that presence. So the Tzimtzum comes. The Tzimtzum conceals the Eir HaBligvul. Remember, the second thing that Tzimtzum will do will also regulate the Eir HaGvul. So the first thing is you need to conceal everything. That's the Tzimtzum. Then following the Tzimtzum, what remains? Remains a Reshimu, a trace of those so-called letters with which God envisioned, the Eisius Lifnei HaTzimtzum envisioned the structure of existence. So that, but it's in a concealed state because the Tzimtzum took away the consciousness and the Eir. The next thing happens is a Kav. The next stage, the Kav, which is a ray of light, not concealment, emerges as this teacher is beginning to stream consciousness to the Makabel, to the space that was empty and quiet. And when the Kav does that, the letters that remained come alive. That will be the root of the containers. So when the Kav, so to speak, brings alive these letters together, they will ultimately create Eiris and Kalim. The Eir being like the Neshama, and the Kalim being like the Guf, the body. So it's important to just know the picture here. And then I'm going to continue reading now what he's coming to say here, because it's relevant to the whole discussion of what will be L'Asad Lave when Ein Oid, as we're going to see. It's not just revealing the light, it's going to be the Kalim themselves have their own Sheirish HaGvul, of Sheirish HaKeach HaGvul. So here's what the Rebbe Rashab says. So pre-Tzimtzum, to put it, maybe to use that to make it even more palpable, the teacher conceals his brilliance, but he's going to use letters when he communicates to the student. So the letters are ready, but they're not yet alive. Then when he begins the stream of consciousness, the Kav, the letters he uses are letters that are from the original idea. The Alter Rebbe in his famous Maimer, Lahovin Masher Kosa Be'etzes Chaim, the end of Likutei Torah, the end of Parshas Sefer Vayikra, there's a famous Maimer where the Alter Rebbe talks about the Tzimtzum, the Reshimu, and the Kav. So he gives a few examples there. There he gives an example where a person knows a sugya, knows a whole idea, and then he needs to conceal it in order to teach it. But in his mind, it remains. And he also, when he starts teaching, let's for example say, the beginning of Shas, you start teaching it to a ben Esel Mishnah. 10 first Mishnah, beginning of Shas. When do you begin to say, when is the time of saying Shema in the evening? Okay? The teacher knows the whole sugya. He knows the whole Mishnah and the Gemara and all the Rishenim and Achreinim and Poskim and so on. He can't be giving all that over because the student will not be able to receive that. So he needs to firstly silence his brilliance. In other words, he cannot be just expounding on it. He has to quiet everything down. Now the student is sitting, opens up the Gemara, the Mishnah Brachas, and the teacher begins to say, these are letters. The teacher knows the letters before he taught the students. As a matter of fact, he knows all the meaning in the letters. He knows every word that the Gemara is going to talk about, what means ba'arvin, and all the different aspects of it. But he's not teaching that. But the letters he's using are letters that come from pre-tzimtzum. These same letters existed in his brilliant understanding of the whole sugya. The student is only hearing that's all he's hearing. You can even say the same example with Aleph Beis. What's a mem? Aleph. What's an Aleph? What's a Beis? The teacher knows what Aleph Beis is, not only what Aleph Beis is, but he knows how Aleph Beis formulates words and ideas and so on. But the student just is now hearing the letters, but he's hearing it with some logic. Because even when you learn the Oyr, there's an idea being conveyed. However, the idea is very diminished. The letters are exactly the same letters that the brilliant teacher knows. So there's two people reading the same words in the Mishnah have very different understanding of it. The teacher has a pre-tzimtzum understanding of it, and the student only has a post-tzimtzum understanding of the same letters. The letters are intact and were not changed. Nothing changed. When the student one day will grow and expand his consciousness and mind and understand as well as the teacher does, he'll say, oh, now I understand the deeper meaning in these letters. So the same letters that two people reading have very different type of paradigm experience. Lifnei tzimtzum, the Oyr fills these letters, and the letters are those letters, but it's all about the Oyr. That's what dominates. Post-tzimtzum, the letters are more important because that's the way the student is spoon-fed the details. But there's an Oyr within them. So this is somewhat of an understanding of what we're talking about, the letters. So the Asis says like this.
No, see, it will be different, no?
Let me continue reading and learning, and we'll stop for questions shortly, soon. Yeah. That even before the tzimtzum, when the Ein Sof was radiating in a revealed way, the teacher, he knows the whole concept. The Reshimu, the issues of Reshimu are filled with light and filled with all the ideas in the analogy I'm giving. Obviously, the analogy is not perfect because at the end of the day, a teacher is a human being. But it's good for this purpose. So he says like this. The as it's known, the letters of the Reshimu, what do they originate from? You know, the idea of Me'emes Shema is Oyed. But the Eibishter didn't just want 10 spheres that are Oyed. He wanted structure. So where does structure come from? That's the Koyach HaHelam. That's God's power to conceal and the power of Koyach HaGvul to create, define parameter. In other words, if the Eibishter just left Koyach HaOyed, Koyach HaGilui, and Koyach and Oyed HaBligvul, or even Eir HaGvul, we wouldn't have any handles and instruments which to hold on to these abstract ideas. Remember, the Eibusha God does not need any of these things. He created Eir. Eir on its own would be, imagine a brilliant teacher knows ideas but has no words to communicate them. That would be Eir without Koyach HaGvul. So the Koyach HaGvul, by the way, in contrast to the Eir HaGvul is still Eir, but it's an Eir that's commensurate to the Kalim. Kalim would be exactly like an artist without a paintbrush. So he could have the art envisioned in his mind and all of that, but he doesn't have a paintbrush. The Kalim are the Eir that give the Eir structure. The Eir HaGvul is the idea as it fits into that structure. The Eir HaBlikvul is the energy as it's beyond the structure. And maybe the Eir El Kolona, the synergy above it all, which we learned at length about very early on in Ayin Beis. I don't want to go into that right now, but it's informing what I'm saying right now. So what is the root of these Oisius? The root of the Oisius is essentially God created a Koyach HaGvul, Chav Beis Oisius, 22 letters, which will serve as the structure where the divine will express itself. So the root of the Oisius Reshimu, he says, is Koyach HaHelam, or no, let me rephrase. The letters of the Reshimu, not the root. The letters of the Reshimu is the power of concealment, meaning we're not talking about the revelation of the divine kavanah and intention that the Eir carries, but it's the power of concealment, the power of Koyach HaGvul. So God created parameters, structure. But remember, before the tzimtzum, the structure cannot emerge. It's all the concept of structure, not actual structure. It's after the tzimtzum, where the light recedes, then the Reshimu's letters become more manifest, and that too will go through many stages until it gets to Atzilus. We have actual Eiris and Kalim. On higher levels, it's still very amorphous. It's almost like the example I've given of the fetus in its early stages of development. You don't yet see Kalim. It's still in a very, like a soup. It's still very nebulous. But you already have the beginnings. And that's another good example. The moment before conception, where God says, I'm ready to send this neshama to these two parents, right? What do you have there? It's all conceptual. You don't yet have anything manifest. When a husband and wife are together in a sacred union, and they conceive, and the egg is fertilized by the seed, and God blesses it with the third partner, blessing it with the neshama, something begins to develop. That's now the beginnings of a keli. It's still one cell, and it's almost invisible, but you have something that you can say the Koyach HaGvul has become active. Before conception, there's also a Koyach HaGvul, but it's not a Koyach HaGvul that's active yet. It's just God's power to create Gvul, to create a body, or to create a structure. But upon conception, which is of course after the tzimtzum, that's when it begins to start taking hold. But then it will develop through Seder Shtalshlus as we go down the Kav, Ak, Akudim, Nekudim, Vrudim, Tikkun, and then of course Bria, Yitzir, Asi, and so on. Okay, so just refreshing the idea before, okay, do the Eisis Reshimu b'chinas Koyach HaHelam, b'chinas Koyach HaGvul Shebei Ensof. So we have Eir HaBlikvul, we have Eir HaGvul, we have Koyach HaGvul, which is what we're discussing right now. The Lifnei HaTzimtzum, Haya Eir Ensof HaBlikvul, Meir Begili Mamish Be'esis Elu. Before the Tzimtzum, and there was no concealment, the teacher, as his full brilliance is flowing forth, the Eir Ensof HaBlikvul is radiating completely Begili Mamish in a revealed way, in a literally revealed way, through these letters, or these letters, to the point the letters weren't even discernible. Because remember, we're talking Lifnei HaTzimtzum, but there's the concept of the letters, because they are, at the end of the day, it's 10 hidden spheres, Chachma, Bina, Das, etc. But it's still Lifnei HaTzimtzum. So there, everything is in a revealed way. Think of like a endless ocean, and all the objects in the ocean are all submerged within the Eir Ensof. So they're mamish radiating the Eis. What did the Tzimtzum accomplish? That Tzimtzum haya shenis'alam ha'er min ha'esis. Like I just explained. The Tzimtzum drained the letters of the energy, so the air became concealed from the letters. Now you have a mem me'emesai. You don't even know what it means because it's just letters. The air is now being concealed completely. Then when you begin to teach, the air starts returning. That's the kav, and starts explaining what is me'emesai step by step from the bottom up that the student can understand. So you have now the shenisal ma'emina esis kaneda umavur b'mokam acher, as it's known and explained elsewhere. So here's what the Rebbe Rashab wants to say. Okay, that was just stating the facts. What's the point? What's relevant to our discussion here regarding Malchus and Eishes Chayla Teres Baila and Einoid? So he says, Hine kol zeh hu shtagili haya'ir la'ya'ishis. All this is not talking about the mile of the Eishis. You're talking about whether the Eishis, whether the air is radiating or not radiating. Shagil haya'ir la'ya'ishis. The Eishis themselves are just inanimate tools. Think of it like the paintbrush or the letters. What are letters without any ideas? If you see Mem Aleph Yud, Mem Sof Yud, which is Me'emesai, just using the example from the Mishnah, or Aleph Beis Gimel Daled, it's just letters. They're inanimate until you give them content. When you take the letters and you turn them into a word and you explain it, but it's all about the Ur. So he says all this is exactly, we talked before about Malchus with the moon. We're talking about how the moon is radiating like the sun, from the sun. It's receiving from this level, that level. These are all still, it's all about kalim that are simply just revealing light. So you're not talking about the Aces themselves. He's talking about all this, kol zeh, the gili is the air. So before the tzimtzum, the air was completely revealed. The teacher, before he concealed, the letters were channels for all his ideas. What did the tzimtzum do? It concealed the air from the Aces. So the Aces don't have air now. And they need air to make them come alive. You don't have a kav, you're not going to have anything. I mean, the letters will be there. In other words, if the teacher doesn't begin to teach me'emesai keivnus hashma to a student, and there's no kav, so all you have is concealment. You have potential, you have letters with the potential of meaning, but you need air. So the whole focus in this whole process that we always learn about lifnei tzimtzum, Aces, tzimtzum, the kav, etc., is all about revelation. None of the discussions about the letters themselves. Who put those letters there? And can those letters themselves have a power? That's what he's saying here. The Aces Hemchinas Hela, the letters on this state are in a state of concealment. They have no meaning until you give them meaning. The only difference is before the tzimtzum, the air was revealed in them. So two things. The air radiated in them, and through them there was a gili air. That was before the tzimtzum. This is the inyan, so we could understand this easier. That was the Ein Sof, filled all the expanse of existence, of reality. And there was no beginning and no end. There was no top and no bottom, because Ein Sof dominated. So all this is about the Gili. Is it Begili or not Begili? The Chiddush la'asid lave, however, and this now introduces a whole other dimension, Einate, that the Chatzrus, the revelation of the new, innovative, completely new thing that will be in the future, that the letters themselves, not because they're conveying an idea and they're expressing an idea, a gilui, like I said with Me'emesai, whatever it may be, the letters themselves will radiate, just like the darkness will radiate, with their own unique power. I know it sounds contradictory. How could the Helam radiate without gilui, without something in it? It would be like saying, if I have a cup of wine, I make Kiddushan, so yes, the cup is a keli for the wine, but the cup doesn't have any end in itself. And then I suddenly tell you you know what? The cup did till now. The cup has its own power. So you see here a whole nother dimension that's being revealed, which is quite mind-blowing. If you talk about Achdus, that the very existence of the Aces themselves, Ye'iru.
So you eat the cup.
Oh, hold on. You're going to have to exercise Tzimtzum right now, because I want to finish the subject. I don't want anyone who's learning here to be confused. So let me finish. Hold your thoughts and questions, and don't process. Just let's absorb.
No, you froze up for a minute, for a few seconds. I didn't even get it.
Are we fine? Are we fine now?
I thought now, but I thought maybe you said that. That's why.
No, I didn't. Hold on. Hold your thought. Let me just finish the point, and then we're going to stop, and I'll take questions. V'hainu, this means shebechinas keich hahelem yeh bechinas er v'gili. So yes, sounds like a paradox that the power of concealment will be in a state of revelation of revelation of light and revelation. Shezeu l'mayla harba min bechinas hagili de Ein Sof, and that is far greater and higher than the gili of Ein Sof lifnei tzimtzum. That's how powerful it is, because it's coming from deeper levels of atzmos than even Ein Sof comes from. So I'm going to read one more line, and then I'm going to stop. U'kamoi kain bebechinas malchus d'Atzilus, and same thing with malchus of Atzilus. Husha'esi is the malchus, the letters of malchus. Hein atzman yeh bebechinas er v'gili. They themselves will be in a state of light and revelation. Okay, so I'm going to stop now. Please, if you want to ask anything, here's a good time. One at a time.
I have a question if no one else wants to start. First of all, it was fascinating and mind-blowing. The phrase koach hahelem is somewhat novel here. I just checked Ayin Beis, the entire tractate. I searched for it, and it only appears one other time until here. Now we've read it 3 times in a few sentences. So to me, that requires a little bit more. Sorry, pardon the pun. Elucidation or illumination. So the power of I guess. Concealment is that what this koach hahelem? It's counterintuitive. You wouldn't think that helem has any koach. Now, obviously, it does here, and here apparently it's the greatest koach, because you're saying it's ultimately gonna be a power that enables the oisios to be ma'iros, to radiate. So obviously, it's a very powerful power, but it's counterintuitive that helem would have koach, and I'm wondering if you can explain the nature of that. I mean, or maybe don't read into it too much. I mean, it's just words, koach hahelem, but previously koach of anything, koach hagvul, koach hablivul, these were very powerful, again, sorry for the pun, concepts, and they gave a lot of insight. Can you explain what is koach hahelem beyond what the literal translation?
Yeah, I'll just use the analogy that we were talking about. The teacher, imagine just an imaginary exercise. A teacher's brilliant mind is flowing, and he's excited and passionate, and he's teaching and teaching and teaching. Imagine he didn't have breaks. He couldn't stop his flow. He couldn't restrain himself. So all you'd have is a flow of consciousness, would be beautiful, brilliant, but really there'd never be any students to be able to receive or learn or grow, etc. He'd be so consumed, and I've met geniuses like this. They gave a class, a shiur, and they just got so excited about their teaching, they never even stopped to see if anybody's understands what they're talking about, they have questions and so on. So basically, the koach hahelem, which is just another name for koach hagvul, is that just as God created a koach, a power to give and flow, chesed, if you wish, he also created a koach called gvura. So it's just like he created Havaya, he created Elikim. 2 names One demonstrates koyach gilui and one is koyach helam. So it's basically two forces at work. And generally speaking, what we've been learning till now was about the focus on how the koyach helam is a process in the koyach gilui. In order to bring gilui to the student, you need to have a tzimtzum, like we learned on the beginning of this volume, page 1207. In order to have a vaya to come to the makabel, you need a lakim. So lakim really encompasses the kavana of gilui, the tzimtzum kavana. So helam is really in order to bring gilui, and the gilui is in order to be received by the student. So that's havaya lakim b'shamayim emal v'aretz mitachas. What he wants to say now is to dissect the anatomy of where does this koyach helam come from in the first place. It itself is also a very fascinating. So he's going to be explaining how the koyach helam itself, not just because it brings gilui or leads to a gilui, like in this analogy, it itself is a power that God created, and the teacher is able to now exercise restraint and stop that flow. That's the koyach helam. And this koyach helam has its own power, divine power, which, as he just said, is even higher than the power to reveal. Essentially, simply put, if a wise person is asked a question, or there's a conversation going on, and a wise person is there, and he has an answer, is it harder for him to speak or harder for him to restrain himself? So it's, of course, harder to restrain, because he has what to say, but for whatever reason, he wants to restrain himself. So that takes more effort, because it's coming from a deeper power. When you have something to say and you don't say it, it takes more strength than saying it. So that's just a small example, which he probably is going to give later. But the point being, that's koyach helam in contrast to koyach gilui.
Got it. That was extremely helpful. Thank you. By the way, you also clarified that koach helam is the same as koach gvul, which makes sense based on everything we've learned so far up to here.
He says, koach helam, koach gvul. He puts it in one.
I see. Right, but why? I guess they must mean something different. I mean, some kind of discernment between the two.
Gvul means restraint, and helam is restraint. I mean, it's basically concealing instead of, like the example of the teacher. He's both restraining, concealing, and it's also limiting. The word limit and restraint and concealment are all pretty synonymous in this context.
I see.
It's the helam of the bligvul. It's the koach gvul is the helam of the bligvul. Bligvul is everything. Gvul is defined. So in order to have gvul, you need to have helam of the bligvul.
I'm wondering if koach. Sorry. All right. I had a follow-up question. Koach gvul is the power to limit, and koach helam is the limitation. The power of that is within the limitation itself. It's a slight difference.
No. The koach helam is the power to conceal, and koach gvul is the power to limit.
Okay. Got it. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Anybody? Rabbi Shlomo, you have no questions?
Can you, I don't know, maybe this is off topic, but today's Tanya talked about that the Eibishter wanted to create the world with Gevura. Can you relate that to what we're learning, or is it off topic too much?
This is very fascinating. You explained it well. This is very fascinating, because then the koach helam, which is koach gvul, is male. You have two contradictions in that. This is only Atmos could do such a thing. It's a gvul, and now we know it, but it's not male. We understand it, that only Atmos could do it. But this would shine means we are feeling that we are gvul, osid lavoi, and we are feeling that this is the this seeing that this is the Atmos. This is higher than gilui from Bligvul.
Yeah. To answer your question, Tzvi, generally speaking, Gvura is this level. Elokim, Helam, Koach gvul. When you speak in context of, like in Tanya, Shayachud Vamuna, where he speaks about Chesed and Gvura, he talks about Tzimtzum is Gvura, Din, Elokim, and Chesed is Havaya and Gilui. So generally, there's the same thing, but it's not necessarily the level in Tanya is this level. It's just in general, it's connected. Yeah.
Yeah, in general, we always know it's connected because the oil cannot come without gvura, but here we're talking something completely different.
Yeah.
Here
he's talking about the root of how gvura itself. Well, it doesn't use the word gvura. Later in the hemshech, later in this flow, in the continuation, he's going to talk a lot about sweetening the gvura from within the gvura. So it's going to be discussed. There's plenty coming. But okay, good. I'm glad we covered this. I think if you use the analogies I shared, it can be very helpful in understanding it more, relate to it, not to be not as abstract.
Not to process too much, but is the implication of this ultimately to say that Gashmias itself, even ourselves, our material innate selves, will be Megal, or Megal is not quite the right word, Ma'ir or. So Gashmias itself will, instead of be a nullity, instead of being nothingness, essentially without Koach HaBligvul, without it will itself radiate.
He didn't say it yet, but it's connected to that. Yes, the answer is yes.
Yeah, that
relates to the Ramban. That's related to the Ramban concept of lust love more than the Rambam, I guess.
The Sham is begufim, yeah. It's basically the Yesh HaNivra becoming one with the Yesh HaMiti, what we talked about. In other words, not through the Ayin. Until now, we've been discussing how the Ayin, the Emtza, the Oyer, is a interface between the true reality, which is Atzmus, and the created reality, which is us. But if you may recall, we also learned in the end of volume 2, well, close to the end, how the Yesh HaMiti, Yesh HaNivra reveals the Yesh HaMiti that Oyer cannot reveal. In that sense, it's very deeply connected to this, but it's going to be discussed more later. And yes, so the answer is yes. Right now, he's talking more in the language of Malchus, Kalim, Reshimu, Asius, but generally speaking, that's going to be the ultimate goal. And what's even more fascinating is that they ultimately join together. The Er HaBligvul and Er HaGvul and the Koach HaGvul all become one synthesis. He's breaking it down now just to make the distinction, but the goal really is that you have Gili and Helam all revealing one divine reality. So till now, we've been talking of Vayalakim in context of Helam and Gili in order to bring Gili. Now he's talking about Helam as a force of its own, which is Ayin. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Amazing.
Yeah. The psychological implications of this are very deep because it ultimately means something that most people don't think of, which is, besides the fact that Chassidus is different than other schools of spirituality where they talk about two levels, materialism and spirituality. We would understand things on three levels. There's matter, spirit, and then there's God that's beyond matter and spirit, that joins them. That's why by mitzvahs maisius in Judaism, actions of mitzvahs are just as important as spirituality, because they both are two tracks. But then now there's even a deeper element that ends up happening here, that you come to a point where when you combine that fact that you can integrate the divine, not just through our souls, but also through our bodies, and through our very substance and structure of existence itself, reflects the power of divine restraint, which goes all the way to these highest levels. And that goes hand in hand with the revelation of the neshama. Then you have yourself something that is really unprecedented. You're not going to find this explained in I've looked far and long in any other school of mysticism, including
it's unbelievable.
Some of the deepest stuff. Yeah, because ultimately materialism, as you mentioned, the Rambam and the Ramban, materialism at best is a stepping stone towards spirituality, but it's never its own revelation of Atzmus in that sense. So that's and it goes, and we're talking about not contradicting Giluyim, because you still need Torah and mitzvahs, and you still need to learn Torah, and you still need to understand and appreciate and know. This is all being internalized. This isn't just some track, an independent track between the letters and the kalim and with Atzmus. It's also being integrated with the beginning of the pasuk. Remember, when you get to Ayin, we don't negate the first half, that Havayu Elokim and the Shemaim Ma'aretz B'tachas, it just becomes one beautiful one mosaic of many different aspects in revealing Elokus in this world on every possible dimension.
Yeah, it's mind blowing, and the psychological implications, as you refer to, are so critical for particularly someone, let's say, who lacks self-esteem, who feels that they're nothing, right? That what can they possibly offer the world? And let's say they don't even have a kesher to the Eibishter, they don't feel spirituality. Maybe they have some concept of it, doesn't flow through them. They're not, whatever. Depression can do terrible things to a mind, to a soul. Creates a blockage sometimes. But if Gashmias itself can be ma'ir, even more so than I guess the oras, the koach, the aura of blikul, then you're not nothing. Your nothingness is actually greater than whatever spirituality that may flow. If you do everything perfectly, your nothingness, as you call it, actually, if you have the mindset of Mashiach, if you have the mindset that you have the potential to radiate even greater than what comes from above, what does that do? I mean, that completely transform someone who feels that they're nothing.
Yeah, yes, that's one of the implications, and there's much more. Yeah, agreed. Well, it goes even further. It goes that the darkness itself, that when a person is in a state of darkness or depression or golus in one way or another, there's something in the root of that capacity for them to be there that's rooted in very deep places. But you have to always remember, the goal here is not just to stay in a state of darkness. The goal is to have geula and revelation, except it's a revelation of the very entity itself, not just as a stepping stone to other levels. We'll learn more about this. Because the trap that you need to avoid is what happened with, let's say, Jacob Frank and the Frankists, where they learned Kabbalah, and they said, you know what? Since the highest levels of the divine can be found in the lowest levels of Klippa, so they literally went and, without exaggeration, orgies and complete hedonism, and without any restraint, without any limits, because they said, 1 second, Atzmus is everywhere. So you have to be careful that that's not the conclusion we come to. This is the opposite, actually. It's coming to say that after you go through the Giluyim, we're now coming to a deeper experience of God, but not that you can just drop all the rules and say, the more hedonistic you are, and the more indulgent you are in your pleasures and your carnal desires, the more atzmus you have. So I just want to make sure that this is not what he's going to at all, God forbid. And it's important because sometimes people have distorted these ideas in thinking that way. Because remember, at the end of the day, the same God that created concealment also created revelation. He wants revelation. It's not just he wants concealment. It's just concealment has a power. But it doesn't mean, for example, someone will say, you know what, since the greatest power lies in doing tshuva, I'll sin the worst possible sins and then I'll do tshuva. So that's not exactly the goal. That's not how it works. Because the same God that wants the concealment wants revelation and wants a Torah mitzvahs. So we can't say it doesn't say only Einoid. It says v'yadaita Ayin v'shavesa levavecha, which means awareness and emotions and feelings. Ki'avayu elikim, and then Einoid, not Einoid instead of. I just wanted to make sure, in case anybody, I'm not thinking that, I'm not suggesting anyone was thinking this way, but it's important to qualify that that's not what the conclusion here is at all. It's the exact opposite.
Yeah, if you're doing chas v'shalom like the Frankisten did, they did the helem, not in the mile for the Ein Sof.
Right. Well, it became their own. There's no God altogether there. There they basically, remember, finding Atzmus in Helem doesn't mean that you become Atzmus and that the Helem is Atzmus. It means that Helem reveals a part of the divine that's beyond revelation, but not that you can decide that you're God, you do whatever you want. It's a big difference. There's two different statements here. That's all.
We still say we want Mashiach now. We don't say we want Golus now.
Yeah.
When the Helem is
you know that
there's no you. That's the whole idea. When you have a you, this is already not the Gilui of the Helam.
Well, let's put it this way. When you have the bittul to Giluyim of Havaya Lakim, then you come to look at the Yesh and to look at the Kalim, then you can reveal, they themselves will reveal godliness. But you cannot jump to Einoid without going through the Havaya Lakim. Let's put it that way. You can't just suddenly say, let's start from, if this is the highest level, why don't we just start with this? Okay, we'll talk more about it. We're stopping here around